At just 23 years old, Nuckie Sylvester carried the kind of weight most people twice her age would struggle to bear. She was a young mother in Ohio, with 3 children depending on her every single day. To the nearly 8,000 followers who scrolled through her Facebook page, she seemed like a spark of energy, a bright young woman who made the hard days look easy. She shared photos of her children, the milestones of motherhood, the jokes, the laughter, the exhaustion, all wrapped in a voice that felt genuine. But on the night of September 23, 2025, everything changed. The timeline on her profile became something entirely different. It became a window into her final moments. Her last words online were unlike anything her friends or family expected. They were raw, detailed, and final. In them, she spoke not just of love for her children, but of funeral instructions, down to the colors pink and black, noting, "Real men wear pink." It wasn't a vague cry for help. It was a farewell letter. And when she wrote, "If this touched Facebook, I'm gone," those reading didn't yet know they were witnessing a goodbye in real time. Hours later, confirmation would arrive. Nuckie Sylvester had ended her life, leaving her 3 children behind, a 6-year-old, a 1-year-old, and a baby only 3 months old. Tonight, we are not simply recounting a story of loss. We are stepping into the haunting reality of a young woman who smiled for the world but crumbled in silence. What pushed her to the point of no return? What did those closest to her miss? And what lessons are hidden in her final words? Lessons we might all be too afraid to confront. For some, this is just another story. For others, it is a reminder of the fragile line between hope and despair. Nuckie's case is not only heartbreaking, it is terrifying in its truth because it shows how much can remain unseen even in plain sight. How many of us scroll past the posts of others, not realizing the weight behind their words until it's too late? This documentary will take you through Nuckie's life, her struggles, her final message, and the devastating aftermath that followed. It will uncover the questions her family and community still wrestle with, and the chilling silence left in the wake of her absence. Make sure you subscribe now, because the stories we uncover remind us how fragile life can be, and you won't want to miss what comes next. If you think tragedies like this are too far removed from your life, you are already mistaken. They happen in neighborhoods just like yours, to people who smile the same way your friends do, and to families who look just like your own. To look away is to risk never understanding how close these stories truly are. This is the story of Nuckie Sylvester, and it begins with her final goodbye. Nuckie Sylvester was born into a world that did not promise her an easy path. Growing up in Ohio, she was described as spirited and kind, the type of young woman who brought laughter into the lives of those who knew her. But behind that laughter, behind the photos and captions that filled her Facebook page, there were struggles few could see. At just 23 years old, she was already a mother of 3, an extraordinary responsibility that demanded strength, patience, and sacrifice. Her children, one 6 years old, another barely learning to walk at a year old, and a newborn only 3 months old, were her world. They were the faces she proudly showed her followers, the reason she pushed herself forward through exhaustion. Yet those same little faces carried a weight that quietly drained her spirit. On social media, she painted herself as a mother, determined to fight through her hardships. She shared the smiles, the little victories, and the bonds that defined her role. To nearly 8,000 followers, she appeared strong, even resilient. But within the privacy of her home, the exhaustion built day after day. The financial strains, the sleepless nights, the constant pressure to keep everything together. These burdens are often invisible until it is too late. And in Nuckie's case, the mask she wore for the world began to crack in the most devastating way. Her final post on September 23, 2025, was not written in passing frustration. It was deliberate. It was organized. It was filled with details that showed she had thought about this moment for far longer than anyone realized. She spoke about her love for her children, reminding those around her that they were the reason she had held on as long as she did. But she also gave chilling funeral instructions, specifying the colors pink and black for the service, emphasizing, "Real men wear pink." These were not idle words. They were instructions for an event she no longer intended to witness. She ended the post with the line that would echo through the minds of everyone who read it. "If this touched Facebook, I'm gone." It was the clearest signal of all, and yet, like so many public cries typed into the void of social media, it was met with disbelief, confusion, and a desperate hope that maybe it was not what it seemed. But reality soon confirmed the worst. Nuckie was gone, leaving her 3 children in the care of loved ones who could never replace her presence. The community was stunned. Friends and family scrolled through her past posts, searching for signs, wondering how they could have missed the truth hidden between her words. For some, it was a wake-up call about the pressures young mothers face in silence. For others, it was a painful reminder that social media can both connect and conceal. Her story is more than just a tragedy. It is a warning. It is a reflection of how much can remain unseen even in the lives we think we know best. The exhaustion, the isolation, the despair, they are struggles that go unspoken until it is too late. This is not simply the account of a life lost. It is the unraveling of a hidden battle fought in plain sight. And as we continue, we will step deeper into the questions her death has left behind. Could someone have saved her? Were there signs that should have been acted on? And how many more lives are at risk when silent suffering is ignored? This is where the story of Nuckie Sylvester truly begins. The hours following Nuckie's final post were filled with a silence that now feels unbearable. On September 23, 2025, her words sat on Facebook for the world to see, chilling in their clarity. Some who read them thought she was venting, perhaps exaggerating, as many do on social media when the weight of life becomes heavy. Others scrolled past without realizing they were looking at a farewell. But for her closest friends and family, the reality struck when messages and phone calls went unanswered. The words, "If this touched Facebook, I'm gone," were not a metaphor. They were her truth. When the confirmation came, it was devastating. Nuckie Sylvester had taken her own life. For her family, the news spread like a shockwave. A mother, a daughter, a sister, and above all, the heart of 3 young children was gone. The children, one 6 years old, one barely 1, and the youngest just 3 months old, were suddenly left without the person who had carried them through every moment of their lives. To outsiders, this was heartbreaking enough. But for those who knew her, the grief was sharpened by guilt. Guilt that they had not seen the signs. Guilt that they could not stop what now seemed inevitable. Her final post became a haunting centerpiece of the tragedy. It wasn't vague or cryptic. It was written with deliberate detail, as if she had already accepted the end. She wanted her children dressed in pink and black, colors that carried meaning for her, even noting, "Real men wear pink." It was her way of leaving a piece of herself behind, a final attempt at control in a world that had overwhelmed her. She didn't just vanish into silence. She left instructions, proof of her love, and words that would echo in the minds of everyone who read them. As news of her death spread, the community's grief unfolded online. Friends shared her photos, videos of her laughing, posts that suddenly carried hidden meanings. Strangers who had never met her shared condolences. But beneath the sorrow was a sense of confusion and helplessness. How could someone who smiled so brightly in photos, who shared her children's joy so openly, have been carrying such unbearable despair? The answer lay in the hidden truth so many young mothers face. Behind the filtered images of family life are struggles with exhaustion, financial pressure, postpartum depression, and a feeling of isolation that few talk about openly. For investigators, there was no mystery about how she died, but the deeper mystery was why. What was the breaking point? Was it the sleepless nights with a newborn? The financial strain of raising 3 children at such a young age? The crushing feeling of trying to hold everything together while silently falling apart? These questions lingered without easy answers. Her story soon moved beyond her family and friends. It became a conversation across Ohio and far beyond. It became a symbol of the hidden battles faced by young mothers, the kind of battles that don't always appear in public until it is too late. Her name, her face, her final words, these became reminders that not every smile is a sign of happiness. This chapter of her story closes with heartbreak, But it also opens a larger truth, that what happened to Nuckie was not an isolated tragedy. It was the visible scar of an invisible struggle, a struggle faced by many who walk among us every day. Her life ended with silence, but her story forces us to listen. The news of Nuckie Sylvester's death spread through her family like a thunderclap. First in hushed phone calls, then in frantic visits, until her entire circle was thrown into the unthinkable. The woman they had known to be so full of life, so deeply committed to her children, was suddenly gone. In the hours after her passing, confusion and disbelief turned into waves of grief that no one could contain. Her children were left in the care of family members, each of them too young to comprehend what had happened. The 6-year-old asked questions no one knew how to answer. The 1-year-old searched for a mother who would no longer appear. The 3-month-old, innocent to it all, cried in the arms of others, unaware of the loss that would shape the rest of their life. The community struggled to process the reality. Friends who had just commented on her photos days earlier now stared at her profile in silence, scrolling back through her posts. Every status, every caption, every late-night update was suddenly examined for clues. People began to wonder, was she asking for help all along? Had her exhaustion been visible in ways no one took seriously? Those questions turned into heavy guilt for some, especially those who had spoken with her in the days before. They replayed conversations in their heads, searching for hints they missed, wishing they had asked one more question, sent one more message, or stopped by unannounced. Her Facebook post quickly became more than words. It became a symbol of what had been overlooked. It was quoted in local news stories, repeated in conversations among neighbors, dissected by strangers who had never met her. The words carried weight because they were so final. She had left behind not just an explanation, but instructions for how she wanted to be remembered. The request that her children be dressed in pink and black for her funeral became a haunting detail, a lasting mark of the love she felt for them even as she chose to leave. For investigators and authorities, there was little to piece together. Unlike many tragic cases that involved long searches for answers, this one carried clarity. The evidence was clear, her words unmistakable. What remained was not an investigation into the act itself, but into the circumstances that had pushed her there. Police and first responders confirmed what her family feared. The finality of their words left no room for doubt. It was suicide. But the bigger investigation began within the hearts of those left behind. They wanted to know how it had come to this, why no one had been able to stop it, and whether there was something more they could have done. In that sense, the community was left with questions that had no simple answers. Mental health struggles, especially for young mothers, often remain in silence, masked by a smile, and hidden beneath the responsibility of caring for children. Her death was not just a loss, it was a mirror held up to everyone around her. It revealed the fragility of the people we think are strong, the quiet cries hidden in plain sight. And in the weeks that followed, it sparked conversations that had been ignored for too long. Neighbors, family, and even strangers began speaking about the pressures of motherhood, the weight of expectations, and the toll of isolation. For those who loved her, these conversations were too late. They were left with a void no discussion could ever fill. But for the wider world, her story became a wake-up call, a haunting reminder that the strongest-looking person in the room may be the one carrying the heaviest burden. In the days that followed Nuckie's passing, the grief transformed into something heavier, something that demanded answers. Her family gathered, torn between mourning their devastating loss and trying to understand how she had reached that point. They replayed her final words, repeating them aloud in disbelief, as if saying them again and again might reveal a hidden meaning they had missed before. But the words were plain, direct, and deliberate. She had spoken of her children, she had given her wishes for her funeral, and she had left no doubt that she had made her decision long before pressing that final button to post. Yet in the aftermath, the question of accountability lingered. Who or what had failed her? There was no courtroom with a defendant in chains, but there was an invisible trial taking place. The system itself stood accused. The gaps in mental health care for young mothers, the lack of community resources, And the silence that surrounds maternal struggles all became the focus. People whispered about postpartum depression, about the crushing weight of raising 3 children with limited support. Some pointed to the fact that Nuckie had publicly shared her struggles online, almost as if she was begging for someone to notice. Others admitted they had seen the exhaustion in her eyes, but assumed she was strong enough to manage it. Local media outlets covered her story with headlines that blended sympathy with shock. They printed her final post, word for word, making sure the chilling line, "If this touched Facebook, I'm gone," was placed front and center. For her family, this was difficult to see, but it also amplified her story beyond their neighborhood. Strangers from other towns and states began commenting, sharing their own experiences with despair, as if her final words had given them permission to speak about their pain. If there had been a courtroom, the witnesses would have been countless. Her children, who would never see their mother again, her friends who wished they had recognized her cries for help, and her family who would forever wonder if they had overlooked the signs. The testimony would have been damning, not against a single person, but against a society that treats mental health as an afterthought until tragedy strikes. The verdict was not spoken in a judge's gavel, but in the collective recognition that something had gone horribly wrong. The systems designed to protect young mothers, the awareness meant to catch the warning signs, had failed her. And as the community came together for her funeral, dressed in the colors she had requested, pink and black, the weight of that failure pressed down on everyone present. Each glance at her children was a reminder that the consequences of this loss would last a lifetime. For those who followed her story online, the guilt was sharp. They had liked her posts, left encouraging comments, but in the end, they had done little to bridge the gap between words on a screen and the reality of her pain. For her family, the guilt was unbearable, but they carried it quietly, knowing nothing could turn back time. The unspoken verdict was clear. Society had been found guilty of silence. The sentence was ongoing. A community left in mourning, children growing up without their mother, and a family forever asking what more could have been done. And as the days turned to weeks, her story remained, not just as a memory, but as a question that haunted everyone who heard it. How many more lives would be lost before real change was made? The weeks after Nuckie's passing unfolded like a shadow that refused to lift. Her funeral came first, the moment her final wishes were carried out exactly as she had written. The sight was heartbreaking. Her children dressed in pink and black, surrounded by family members whose faces carried a grief too deep to mask. Every detail of the service reflected her words, as if she had been present in spirit, directing the last chapter of her life. Friends clutched one another, whispering about how surreal it felt to follow instructions she had written only hours before her death. For many, it was their first time realizing how clear her message had been, and that realization only deepened the sorrow. But when the funeral ended and the visitors went home, the harder reality set in. Nuckie's children had no mother to comfort them, and her family was left to navigate the daily responsibilities she had once carried alone. Her 6-year-old began asking questions in quiet moments, questions no one had the strength to answer fully. The younger two, too small to understand, responded only with cries, searching instinctively for the mother who was no longer there. For her family, these moments were the cruelest verdict of all, the permanent reminder that her absence was not temporary, not something they could recover from. Outside of her home, the community tried to make sense of what had happened. Social media remained flooded with her photos and videos, posts reshared by people who wanted to keep her memory alive. Vigils were held, candles lit, and tributes written. For days, her name was spoken with both love and regret. Yet alongside the mourning came uneasy conversations. People asked what could have been done differently, whether society had failed her, whether those who read her post could have acted faster. It became clear that her death was not just a personal tragedy, but a public reckoning. Discussions about postpartum depression and maternal mental health took center stage. Advocates, counselors, and even local leaders began speaking out, calling for more resources for young mothers, more education, more open dialogue. Some argued that Nuckie's story should never be forgotten, that it should serve as a warning about what happens when silent suffering is left unaddressed. Others, too weighed down by grief, admitted that no matter how much they talked about it now, it was already too late for her. For her family, the aftermath was marked by both pain and determination. They wanted her remembered not only for the way she died, but for the life she lived, for the love she poured into her children, the laughter she gave her friends, and the strength she carried, even in exhaustion. But they also wanted people to face the truth, that behind every smiling photo could be a battle unseen, and that ignoring those battles could lead to devastating consequences. As weeks turned into months, theories began to circulate. Some believed it was postpartum depression, intensified by the weight of raising a newborn. Others pointed to financial struggles, to the pressure of raising 3 children so young without the full support she needed. A few whispered about deeper struggles with mental health that had gone undiagnosed. None of these theories could undo what had happened, but they painted a picture of a life overwhelmed from every side. In the end, the aftermath of Nuckie's death left behind a silence that no one could fill, a story that demanded to be remembered, and a warning that continues to echo long after her final words. Her story became more than just a tragedy. It became a mirror held up to every community, asking the same painful question: if it could happen to her, how many others are suffering unseen? In the final reflection of Nuckie's story, what remains is not just the silence of her absence, but the echoes of the questions she left behind. Her life, though short, told of the immense love she had for her children, yet also the crushing weight of carrying too much alone. Her last words were not simply a goodbye, they were a message to everyone watching her life unfold on a screen, a warning that appearances can deceive, that a smile can hide an unbearable struggle. For her family, the loss was permanent. Each day became a reminder of what was missing: her voice, her laughter, her presence. For her children, the absence would shape their lives in ways no one could yet measure. And for the community, her death stood as a haunting lesson in the cost of silence. People asked themselves if they had overlooked her pain, if they had mistaken her openness online for true connection. The legacy of Nuckie Sylvester is one of both heartbreak and urgency. Her story insists that we pay attention, that we speak, that we act, because behind the smiles we see, there may be battles no one has dared to reveal.